He signed the divorce papers with a smirk, tossed her a check for $50,000, and told her she was nothing but a burden. His mother laughed. His sister raised a glass. His mistress was already picking out engagement rings. What none of them knew was that the woman sitting quietly at the end of that dinner table, the woman they called simple, the woman they mocked for her cheap clothes and her little freelance hobby, was the secret owner of a $40 billion empire. The pen she used to sign those papers, a limited edition Mont Blanc, worth $40,000. The beat-up Honda they let her keep. She left the keys on the gatepost. 2 minutes later, an armored Maybach pulled up in the darkness. But here is where the story gets truly insane. 3 days after the divorce, her ex-husband's family came begging for a meeting with the mysterious CEO of the biggest company in New York. They walked into that boardroom expecting to meet the man who would save them from bankruptcy. The doors opened, and she walked in. The look on his face? Priceless. But what happened next was something nobody, not even Emily, saw coming. Stay with me. This story has more twists than you are ready for. He handed her the divorce papers across the dinner table, sneering that she was nothing but a burden, a penniless freelancer, dragging down his family's prestige. He laughed when she signed them, without reading the terms, thinking she was too stupid to fight for alimony. What Brandon Hayes did not know was that the cheap pen she used to sign her name was a limited edition Mont Blanc worth $40,000. He did not know that the freelance work she did in her home office was actually managing a global hedge fund worth billions. And he certainly did not know that the company his family was desperate to merge with to save them from bankruptcy was hers. This is the story of Emily Sterling, the woman who was divorced for pennies only to be revealed as the empress of the business world. Grab your popcorn. You are not going to believe how this ends. The chandelier above the dining table at the Hayes estate was crystal imported from Austria, and on this particular evening, it was the only thing in the room that sparkled. The atmosphere below it was suffocating, heavy with the scent of roasted duck and unearned arrogance. Emily Sterling sat at the far end of the table, her hands folded quietly in her lap. It was her 3rd wedding anniversary with Brandon Hayes, but there were no flowers, no card, and certainly no warmth. Instead, she was surrounded by the 3 people who had made the last 3 years feel like a slow-motion car crash of emotional destruction. Brandon, his mother, Patricia, and his sister, Caroline. Emily, for heaven's sake, don't slouch. Patricia snapped from across the table, slicing into her duck with surgical precision. It makes that dress look even cheaper than it already is. Emily straightened her spine. Her face was a mask of practiced calm, the kind of calm you learn when every dinner is a battlefield and your weapons are patience and silence. The dress Patricia was mocking was actually a bespoke piece from a quiet atelier in Milan. Made of vicuna wool, one of the rarest fabrics on earth. It had cost roughly $12,000. But Patricia, who only recognized luxury when it came plastered with logos across someone's chest, saw nothing but a discount bin reject. "Sorry, Patricia," Emily said softly. Caroline, Brandon's younger sister, swirled her glass of Chardonnay with the lazy confidence of someone who had never worked a day in her life. "And tell me, Emily," she said with a syrupy smile, "did you finally land a client for your little graphic design hobby? Or are you still asking my brother for grocery money?" Brandon sat at the head of the table. He was a handsome man, classic jawline, expensive haircut, the kind of face that looked good on a company brochure. But his eyes had grown cold over the past year, and the warmth that had once drawn Emily to him had been replaced by something hard and calculating. He did not defend his wife. He chuckled a dry, dismissive sound that scraped against Emily's nerves like sandpaper on glass. He was the vice president of Hayes and Company, a mid-sized logistics firm founded by his father, Robert. They pulled in a few million a year, enough to maintain this mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, and a summer house in the Hamptons. But in the world of real money, the world Emily secretly came from, they were small fish in a bathtub pretending to be whales in an ocean. Actually, Brandon said, setting down his fork and wiping his mouth with a linen napkin, that is what we need to talk about tonight, Evie. The room went quiet. Even Patricia stopped chewing. Emily looked up, her gray eyes steady and unreadable. She knew this tone. She had heard it building for months, like distant thunder rolling closer. She had seen the text messages from a woman named Jessica on his phone. She had seen the credit card charges for jewelry she never received. She had felt the bed grow cold on the nights he claimed to be working late. "We are done," Brandon said. He did not say it with sadness. He did not say it with regret. He said it with relief, like a man putting down a suitcase he had been forced to carry for too long. He reached under the table and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He slid it across the polished mahogany surface. It stopped inches from her water glass. "Divorce papers," Brandon said, as if she could not read the bold letters printed on the front. "My lawyer drafted them this morning. Irreconcilable differences. Let us be honest, Evie. You do not fit in this world. You are simple. You are content with mediocrity. My family is destined for greatness, and I need a partner who can help me ascend. Not an anchor dragging me to the bottom." Patricia let out a long, dramatic sigh of relief. "Finally, Brandon, I have been saying it since the wedding day. That girl has no ambition, no connections, and no sense of style. You deserve better." Caroline raised her glass. "To freedom," she said, grinning. Emily did not reach for the envelope immediately. She looked at her husband, this man she had agreed to marry 3 years ago, because he had seemed kind. He had seemed genuine. He had seemed different from the sharks she had grown up with in the upper echelons of global finance. She had wanted something simple. She had wanted to be loved for herself, not for the sterling name, which carried the weight of a multi-billion-dollar empire behind it. So she had hidden everything. She told him she was an orphan, a freelance graphic designer, a nobody from Ohio. She had wanted to see if he would build a life with her from scratch. He had failed the test in spectacular fashion. "Is there someone else?" Emily asked, her voice perfectly steady. Brandon smirked. He actually smirked. "Her name is Jessica Price. Her father sits on the board of Technovest. She has connections, Evie. She has class. She has everything you are not. We are getting engaged the moment the ink is dry on these papers." Emily repeated the name in her mind. Jessica Price. She knew it well. The Price family was notorious in New York financial circles. New money, loud money, leveraged to the hilt with debt they papered over with charity donations and social media posts. Jessica herself was a professional social climber who treated galas like hunting grounds. "The settlement is generous," Brandon continued, tapping the envelope with his index finger. $50,000. You keep your car, that beat-up Honda Civic, and your personal belongings. In exchange, you waive all rights to Hayes and Company assets and any claim to alimony. It is a clean break. Take it, or my lawyers will bury you in litigation until you are living on the street." Caroline laughed. $50,000? That is more than she has made in her entire life. You are too generous, brother. Emily looked at the envelope. $50,000. It was less than what she spent on server maintenance for her private trading algorithm in a single week. It was pocket change. It was an insult so small it almost circled back around to being funny. She reached into her purse, a plain black leather bag that was actually a vintage Hermes prototype worth more than Patricia's car, and pulled out a pen. Heavy. black lacquer with platinum trim, the $40,000 Mont Blanc that Brandon thought was a knockoff. "You want me to sign right now?" Emily asked. "Do not pretend you need to read it," Patricia sneered, waving her hand dismissively. "You would not understand the legal language anyway. Just sign it and leave. We have guests arriving at 8. Jessica is bringing champagne." Emily uncapped the pen. She did not cry, she did not scream, she did not beg. Instead, a strange, cold smile touched her lips. It was a smile that for one split second made Brandon feel something unexpected. A shiver of unease, because it was not the smile of a defeated housewife. It was the smile of a predator watching a mouse walk directly into a trap. She flipped to the back page, signed her name in a fluid, confident stroke, and closed the folder. Done, Emily said, standing up. Brandon blinked. He had expected tears. He had prepared himself for begging, for pleading, for the messy emotional scene he could later tell Jessica about over cocktails. But Emily just stood there, calm as a glacier. "Just like that?" he asked. "Just like that," Emily said. She placed the pen back in her bag. "You're right, Brandon. I do not fit in this world. I never did. And you certainly do not fit in mine." She turned to Patricia and delivered her parting gift with the precision of a surgeon. "The duck was dry, Patricia. It always is." Before the matriarch could sputter a response, Emily walked out of the dining room. Her heels clicked against the marble floor with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. The heavy oak doors of the Hayes estate closed behind her with a finality that tasted like liberation. The Connecticut night air was crisp and biting, but Emily did not feel the cold. She felt something else entirely. She felt the shedding of a skin she had worn for 3 long years, a skin that had never fit, that had chafed and suffocated and slowly drained the color from her world. She walked down the long, winding driveway of the Hayes estate, past the imported marble fountain that Brandon was so proud of and that was currently leaking from a crack no one had bothered to fix. She reached the main gate and paused. The beat-up Honda Civic sat where she had parked it that morning. The car Brandon had graciously allowed her to keep as part of his generous $50,000 divorce settlement. Emily looked at the car for a long moment, then she placed the keys on top of the gatepost and walked away from it. She pulled out her phone and tapped a quick sequence. 2 minutes later, the darkness of the country road was sliced open by the blinding headlights of 2 black SUVs. They were not ride-shares. They were armored Cadillac Escalades with bulletproof glass and government-grade communication systems. Behind them, purring like a panther, rolled a sleek midnight blue Maybach. The convoy pulled up to the gate in perfect formation. The rear door of the Maybach opened, and a man in a sharp navy suit stepped out. He was older, mid-50s, with silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite by someone who did not believe in smiling. This was Harrison Cole, widely considered the most feared corporate attorney in New York City. He charged $2,500 an hour. He had argued cases before the Supreme Court, and right now he was holding the car door open for a woman the Hayes family believed was a penniless graphic designer. "Ms. Sterling," Harrison said, inclining his head with genuine respect. "Or should I say, Mrs. Hayes?" "Ms. Sterling," Emily corrected, sliding into the plush, leather interior of the Maybach. "Definitely Ms. Sterling. That chapter is closed. Did you bring the file?" "It is on the tablet," Harrison said, settling into the seat opposite her as the car pulled away from the Hayes estate. The mansion shrank in the rear window until it disappeared entirely, swallowed by the Connecticut darkness. I have also taken the liberty of canceling the joint bank accounts. The $50,000 settlement check has been wired to a charity for rescue dogs. I made the donation in Brandon's name. I assumed you did not want the money. Smart man? Emily murmured. She picked up a glass of sparkling water from the Maybox built-in console and took a long sip. How are things at Vanguard? Harrison's expression shifted from polished calm to something more serious. Chaotic, he admitted. The board is restless. They have been running on autopilot for 3 years, while the phantom CEO managed everything remotely. The expansion into clean energy is stalling. The institutional investors want a face. They want leadership they can see and shake hands with. They need you back, Evie. The sabbatical is over. Emily stared out the window at the passing trees. For 3 years, she had operated Vanguard Global, a holding company with tentacles in real estate, technology, logistics, and clean energy, from the spare bedroom of the Hayes Mansion. Total assets under management exceeded $40 billion. She ran it all through encrypted servers, proxy executives, and a network of trusted lieutenants led by Harrison and her best friend, Margaret Wells, who served as the company's chief operating officer. The world knew the CEO of Vanguard Global only as a ghost. No public appearances, no photographs, no interviews. Financial journalists called her the Phantom CEO. Forbes had once run a cover story titled "The Silent Billionaire with a Silhouette Where Her Face Should Have Been." She had done all of this because of a promise. Her father, Archibald Sterling, founder of the Sterling Exchange, and one of the most respected financiers of his generation, had made her promise on his deathbed 4 years ago. "They will love you for the money, Evie," he had said, his hand trembling in hers, every one of them. "Find someone who does not know who you are. Find someone who loves the woman, not the fortune." She had found Brandon Hayes. And now, 3 years later, sitting in the back of a Maybach that cost more than his entire house, she knew the truth. Without the money, some people simply did not think you were worth loving at all. Here is something worth remembering. And I say this not as a narrator, but as someone who has watched too many good people learn this lesson the hard way. Your value is not determined by someone else's ability to see it. If the people closest to you can only measure your worth in dollars, then what they are offering you is not love. It is an appraisal, and you deserve more than a price tag. "Take me to the penthouse," Emily said, and her voice had changed. The softness was gone. In its place was something harder, sharper, like a blade being drawn from its sheath. "I need a shower. Call my stylist. And Harrison, I need to burn these clothes." The next morning, the sun rose over Manhattan and caught the glass spire of Sterling Tower, sending shards of golden light across the skyline. The building stood 92 stories tall in the heart of the financial district, a monument to everything Archibald Sterling had built and everything his daughter was about to reclaim. On the 90th floor, Emily stood before a floor-to-ceiling mirror in her private dressing suite. The transformation was complete. Gone was the messy bun she had worn like a disguise for 3 years. Her hair was now a sleek razor-sharp bob that framed her face like a helmet built for war. The beige cardigans were gone, replaced by a tailored charcoal gray Armani power suit that fit her like it had been painted on. Her stiletto heels were black, pointed, and looked like they could puncture steel. She picked up her phone. It was buzzing with notifications from the Hayes family group chat, which she had not yet left. She scrolled through the messages with the detached amusement of a scientist observing bacteria under a microscope. Patricia had written, "Can you believe she took the salt shakers? So petty. Emily had not taken the salt shakers. Brandon had written, "Good riddance. Jessica is coming for brunch. Make sure the house is spotless." Caroline had added a string of celebratory emojis. Emily smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the kind of smile that would make a reasonable person take 3 steps backward. She opened a text to Harrison Cole and typed 6 words. Initiate phase 1. Call the bank. She put the phone in her pocket and walked to the private elevator. When the doors opened, in the main lobby of Vanguard Global Headquarters, the noise of 300 employees working phones, typing reports, and arguing about market projections died instantly. It was as if someone had pressed a mute button on the entire floor. Security guards straightened their spines. A receptionist dropped her phone. Analysts froze mid-sentence. They recognized her. Not as Brandon Hayes's quiet wife, not as the freelance graphic designer from Connecticut. They recognized her as Emily Sterling, the daughter of the founder, the genius who had predicted the 2024 tech crash 6 months before it happened, the woman who owned the building they were standing in. "Welcome back, Ms. Sterling," the head of security said, his voice booming across the lobby. Emily did not stop walking. "Morning, John. Conference room A in 10 minutes. I want the full acquisition team assembled and ready." She paused at the elevator and looked back over her shoulder at the frozen workforce. "We are going shopping." The boardroom on the 91st floor of Sterling Tower was a cathedral of glass and chrome. The conference table was long enough to seat 30 people and made from a single slab of Italian marble that had been helicoptered onto the roof during construction. Emily took her seat at the head of it, a seat that had been empty for 3 years, and the weight of the moment settled around her like armor. Margaret Wells, known to everyone as Maggie, was already seated to Emily's right. Maggie was 34, sharp as a scalpel, with auburn hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail and the kind of direct eye contact that made junior analysts suddenly remember urgent appointments elsewhere. She was Emily's oldest friend, her college roommate, and the only person outside of Harrison Cole who had known the truth about Emily's double life. Maggie slid a tablet across the table. "Welcome back to the real world, boss. I made you a highlight reel of everything the board has been screwing up while you were playing house in Connecticut." Emily smirked. "How bad?" Maggie tilted her hand back and forth. "On a scale of 1 to dumpster fire, I would say we are at a solid, smoldering trash heap. Manageable, but only because I have been putting out fires with a garden hose for 3 years." The rest of the acquisition team filed in. The chief financial officer, the head of mergers, 3 senior analysts. They took their seats, opened their laptops, and waited. Emily pressed a button, and the massive screen behind her flickered to life. A company logo appeared. Hayes and Company. "Ladies and gentlemen," Emily began, her voice calm and commanding. "This company is a mid-sized logistics firm based in Greenwich, Connecticut. They handle regional freight distribution for the Northeast Corridor. They are currently leveraging their assets to expand into the Midwest, which has overextended their cash reserves. Their primary creditor is North-South Bank. The chief financial officer, a meticulous man named Gerald Patterson, adjusted his glasses, which we acquired 7 months ago as part of the distressed asset portfolio." "Exactly," Emily said. "Hayes and Company has a balloon payment due to North-South Bank in 30 days, $2 million. They do not have the cash. They have been burning through reserves, and, I have reason to believe, dipping into funds they should not be touching." She let that implication hang in the air. They are banking on a merger with a larger firm to bail them out. Specifically, they sent a proposal last week to Vanguard Logistics, one of our subsidiaries. A junior analyst leaned forward. "They want to merge with us?" "They want to be saved by us," Emily corrected. They just do not know that we are the ones holding the rope and the scissors. Accept the meeting. Tell them the CEO of Vanguard Global is personally interested in their innovative regional approach. Schedule it for this Friday. Gerald frowned. Ms. Sterling, with all respect, their financials are a disaster. They are a nepotism-run sinking ship. Why would we waste our time? Emily leaned back in her chair and let the silence build for 3 full seconds before she answered. I do not want to acquire them for profit, Gerald. I want to acquire them so I can fire the vice president. The vice president? Brandon Hayes, my ex-husband. As of 72 hours ago, a ripple of shock moved through the room like a wave through still water. It was followed quickly by the kind of electric understanding that comes when very smart people realize they are about to witness something extraordinary. Set the meeting, Emily commanded, and make sure they bring the whole family. Tell them we like to do business with family-oriented companies. The room began to buzz with energy. Laptops clicked. Phones vibrated. The machine was moving. Then Maggie's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, frowned, and stepped out of the boardroom. When she came back 2 minutes later, the color had drained from her face. Evie, Maggie said, closing the door behind her, we have a problem. A big one. Emily's fingers stilled on her tablet. What kind of problem? The kind that could blow up everything. Maggie sat down heavily. I just got a call from our head of communications. A reporter at the Metropolitan Post contacted our PR department this morning. She has a source inside Vanguard. A whistleblower. Someone who knows your real identity and is willing to confirm it on the record. Emily felt the room tilt slightly, though she did not let it show on her face. What is the angle? Maggie pulled up the draft headline on her tablet and turned it so Emily could read it. The words hit like a punch to the sternum. Billionaire heiress. Played poor for 3 years. Was her marriage a social experiment or a scam? The story frames you as the villain, Maggie said quietly. You lied to your husband about your identity. You deceived his family. And now you are using your billions to destroy them in a personal vendetta. The reporter is giving us 48 hours to comment before she publishes. Emily stared at the headline. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. She had hidden her identity to protect herself, to find genuine love in a world where money poisoned everything it touched. And now that very decision was being twisted into a weapon aimed directly at her heart. Harrison spoke from the far end of the table. If this story runs before we execute the plan, Brandon's legal team could use it to file a countersuit. Fraud, emotional distress. They could argue that the entire marriage was predicated on deception, which could void the divorce settlement and potentially give him grounds to claim a portion of Vanguard through marital asset laws. Emily closed her eyes. Her father's dying wish, find someone who loves the woman and not the fortune, was about to become the headline used to destroy her. Harrison continued, on the bright side, they are calling you the billionaire bride. It has a certain ring to it. Sounds like a reality show I would actually watch. Emily opened her eyes. Harrison, you are fired. Harrison did not even look up from his legal pad. You fire me every Tuesday. I will see you at Wednesday's meeting. Despite everything, a ghost of a smile crossed Emily's face. Then it vanished, replaced by the cold focus of a woman who had spent her entire adult life solving problems that would crush ordinary people. Find the whistleblower, Emily said. Tonight, I want to know who they are, what they want, and how much it will cost to make this go away before Friday. The hunt took 14 hours. Maggie and the internal security team traced the leak to a junior data analyst named Kevin Porter, a 26-year-old who had been passed over for promotion 3 months earlier and had apparently decided that revenge was best served through journalism. They found him at his apartment in Brooklyn at 2 in the morning, surrounded by empty energy drink cans and a laptop full of encrypted files he did not know how to properly encrypt. Harrison's team offered Kevin a choice: a generous severance package and a non-disclosure agreement with teeth sharp enough to bite through steel, or a lawsuit for breach of his employment contract that would follow him for the rest of his professional life. Kevin signed the NDA at 3:15 in the morning. By dawn, the Metropolitan Post story was dead. The reporter had no source, no confirmation, and no story. Emily sat in her penthouse watching the sunrise over Manhattan and allowed herself a single breath of relief. The Friday meeting was still on. The plan was intact. She was safe, or so she thought. What Emily did not know, what she could not have predicted, was that Brandon Hayes, for all his vanity and bluster, possessed one quality that occasionally mimicked intelligence: paranoia. The moment the meeting with Vanguard Global had been confirmed, something had nagged at Brandon. Not the deal itself. He was fully convinced that the mysterious CEO of a $40 billion company had heard about his brilliant regional logistics strategy and wanted to invest. No, what bothered Brandon was the timing. Just days after his divorce from Emily, the biggest opportunity of his career had fallen into his lap like a gift from the heavens. Things that seemed too good to be true, Brandon's father Robert had warned him over the phone, his voice tight with anxiety, usually are. So Brandon had done something uncharacteristically cautious. He had hired a private investigator, not a good one. Brandon was too cheap for that. He hired a mid-range guy named Phil Dawson, who operated out of a strip mall office in Stamford and charged $200 a day plus expenses. Phil Dawson could not crack the layers of shell companies and proxies that shielded Emily's identity as Vanguard's CEO. That level of corporate espionage was far above his pay grade. But Phil Dawson was reasonably competent at one thing: digging through public records, and what he found in 24 hours of searching was enough to make Brandon's blood run cold. He called Brandon on Thursday evening. "Mr. Hayes, I have something. The general counsel of Vanguard Global is a man named Harrison Cole." Phil paused for effect. "The same Harrison Cole who represented your wife in the divorce." Brandon nearly dropped his phone. "What?" "That is impossible." "It is public record," Phil said. "Harrison Cole filed the divorce paperwork on behalf of Emily Summers, which I am guessing is your wife's maiden name. And he is also the listed general counsel for Vanguard Global Holdings. He has been for over a decade." Brandon paced his living room, his mind racing. Emily was connected to Vanguard. He did not know how. Maybe she had gotten a job there after the divorce. Maybe Harrison had helped her get hired as a secretary or something. But the connection was there, and in Brandon's mind, it meant one thing: someone was trying to sabotage the deal. He called his lawyer at 9 that night. By 10:30, they had drafted an emergency motion to freeze the divorce proceedings, citing conflict of interest, potential fraud, and collusion between his ex-wife and the acquiring company. The court papers were served at Emily's penthouse at 11 o'clock on Thursday night, exactly 15 hours before the scheduled meeting at Sterling Tower. Emily was in her study, reviewing the presentation she planned to deliver the next afternoon, when the doorman called up. A process server was in the lobby. She went downstairs in her robe, accepted the blue-backed legal documents, and read them standing in the elevator on the way back up. By the time the elevator doors opened on her floor, her jaw was tight and her knuckles were white around the papers. She called Harrison. "He found you," she said. Harrison was silent for 2 full seconds, which for a man who charged by the minute was an eternity. "He found the connection between us? Between you and Vanguard? Not me? Not yet. but he has filed an injunction to freeze the divorce. Conflict of interest. If I walk into that boardroom tomorrow and reveal myself, his lawyers will argue. The entire marriage was a setup to steal his company. Harrison exhaled slowly. Then we do not reveal you tomorrow. We adjust. I will conduct the meeting alone. You stay behind the glass. Emily pressed her forehead against the cold window of her penthouse. 90 stories below, Manhattan glittered like a circuit board. She had spent 3 years preparing for this moment. The moment when she would look Brandon in the eye and watch his world crumble. And now a $200 a day private investigator had stolen it from her. She called Maggie at 2 in the morning. He found the connection. Not all of it, but enough to tie my hands. So what do we do? Maggie asked, her voice thick with sleep but sharpening fast. We do not cancel the meeting. We change the strategy. Harrison goes in alone. I work behind the scenes to get the injunction dissolved. And then? And then, Emily said, staring at the skyline with eyes that burned. I walk into that room myself, but it will not be Friday. It will be when I choose, on my terms and my time. She hung up and sat alone in the dark for a long time. The city hummed below her. She thought about her father. She thought about his promise. She thought about 3 years of dry duck dinners and being told she was not enough. Dad, she whispered to the empty room, you told me to find love without money. I found hate instead, and now even my money cannot fix it. Friday arrived with a slate-gray sky that threatened rain, but the mood inside the Hayes family's rented stretch limousine was sunny to the point of delusion. Brandon had insisted on the limo. It was a tacky move for a serious business meeting, the equivalent of wearing a tuxedo to a job interview at a hardware store. But Brandon believed in making an entrance. Remember, he said, checking his reflection in the rearview mirror for the 10th time, let me do the talking. Dad, you just nod and agree. Mom, try not to be yourself, Patricia scoffed from the back seat, adjusting a diamond brooch that was almost certainly cubic zirconia. I am the charm of this family, Brandon. If it were not for my social graces, your father would still be driving a forklift. Robert Hayes sat in the corner, dabbing sweat from his forehead with a yellowing handkerchief. He was the only person in the car who understood the true gravity of their situation. Hayes and Company was not just broke, it was illegally broke. Last month, Robert had quietly transferred $400,000 from the employee pension fund to cover operating costs. If this deal with Vanguard did not go through, he was not facing bankruptcy. He was facing federal prison. The limousine pulled up to Sterling Tower in downtown Manhattan. The building rose into the clouds like a blade of glass and steel, so imposing that it seemed to look down on the rest of the city with quiet contempt. Jessica Price, clinging to Brandon's arm in a designer dress she had charged to her father's credit card, craned her neck to look up through the sunroof. Do you know how much rent is in this building? She breathed. My dad said even a closet in this place costs more than a house in New Jersey. And soon, Brandon said, squeezing her knee with the confidence of a man about to be hit by a train he could not see. We will be partners with the people who own it. The lobby was a cathedral of capitalism. 40-foot ceilings, abstract art on the walls that cost more than the Hayes family's combined lifetime earnings. Security personnel who looked like they had been recruited from special operations units. Brandon approached the front desk with his most practiced smile. Brandon Hayes and party. We are here to see the CEO. 2 o'clock appointment. The receptionist did not smile back. She typed something into her computer. Mr. Hayes? You are expected. Elevator bank C. Top floor. You have been cleared for the executive suite. Top floor, Brandon whispered to Jessica as they walked toward the elevators. That is where the gods live. The elevator climbed 90 stories in under a minute. When the doors opened, the Hayes family stepped into a space that looked more like a modern art museum than a corporate office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 360-degree view of New York City. Standing by the window, silhouetted against the skyline like a figure in a painting, was Harrison Cole. "Welcome," Harrison said, turning to face them. His navy suit fit like armor, and his expression carried the warmth of a January sidewalk. "Please follow me. The CEO will join us shortly." Shortly became 20 minutes. The Hayes family was seated on one side of a conference table, long enough to land a small airplane on. Bottles of imported water, leather-bound notepads. Everything was designed to communicate one message. You are very, very small, and the people who own this room are not. Harrison did not sit. He stood at the head of the table, hands clasped behind his back, and began to methodically dismantle every illusion the Hayes family had ever held about their own importance. "We have reviewed your financials, Mr. Hayes," Harrison said. "Your company has approximately $4 million in outstanding debt to North-South Bank. Your operating margins have been negative for 3 consecutive quarters. Your primary logistics contract with Amazon was terminated 3 weeks ago, and your employee pension fund appears to have experienced some rather unusual withdrawals." Robert Hayes turned the color of old milk. Brandon jumped in, his voice cracking slightly. "We are growing aggressively. That requires capital investment. If you look at the projection models for the next fiscal year, we are not here to discuss projection models," Harrison said, cutting him off with the precision of a scalpel. "We are here to discuss reality. And the reality is that Hayes and Company is insolvent. Vanguard Global is prepared to acquire your company for $1. Silence. $1? Brandon's voice came out as a whisper, then rose to a shout. $1? This company is worth $20 million. We have assets. We have brand recognition. We have You have debt, Harrison interrupted. You have a balloon payment you cannot cover. You have an SEC investigation that is approximately 72 hours from landing on your father's desk. He looked directly at Robert. And you have embezzled $400,000 from your employees' retirement fund, which, for the record, is a federal crime. Robert Hayes began to openly weep. Patricia grabbed the edge of the table as if the room were spinning. Jessica Price slowly, carefully, removed her hand from Brandon's arm. Brandon pointed a shaking finger at Harrison. "This is a setup. This whole meeting is a setup. My ex-wife, she works here, does she not? She put you up to this." Harrison's expression did not change by a single millimeter. "Your ex-wife is not relevant to this discussion, Mr. Hayes. What is relevant is that Vanguard Global owns your debt. We acquired North-South Bank's distressed asset portfolio this morning. That means we own your loans. We own your mortgage. And in approximately 29 days, we own everything else." The Hayes family left Sterling Tower in ruins. The limousine ride back to Connecticut was silent except for Robert's quiet sobbing and Patricia's occasional muttering about the quality of the free water. But the meeting, devastating as it was only the first act of a very bad week for Brandon Hayes, because 3 days after the meeting, something happened that he never saw coming. Jessica Price called Harrison Cole. Not Brandon, not Robert, not a lawyer. She called the general counsel of the company that was about to destroy her boyfriend's family, and she said 6 words that changed everything. "I have his laptop. What is it worth?" Jessica Price had never been anyone's idea of a moral compass. She operated on a simple principle that had served her well since college. Identify the winning side, then make sure you are standing on it before the ground shifts. She had seen the writing on the wall during the Vanguard meeting. The Hayes family was a sinking ship, and Jessica had no intention of drowning with them, so she had done what she did best. She survived. The laptop she delivered to Harrison's office on Monday morning contained 3 years of Brandon's personal emails, financial records, and text messages. Most of it was damning, but expected. The affair, the expense account fraud, the jewelry charged as office supplies. But buried in the email archives was something that made even Harrison Cole, a man who had spent 30 years swimming with corporate sharks, raise his eyebrows. Brandon had written to Jessica 6 months into their affair. Emily is so stupid, she would believe anything. She thinks I work late. I could rob a bank in front of her, and she would apologize for being in the way. There were others, dozens of them, each one more contemptuous than the last. He had mocked Emily's cooking. He had mocked her clothes. He had mocked the way she said, "I love you" before bed every night, like a child who still believed in fairy tales. Harrison brought the laptop to Emily that afternoon. She read the emails in silence, her face perfectly still. When she finished, she closed the laptop and sat, without moving, for nearly a full minute. Then she said, "Add the emails to the SEC filing. All of them." The injunction hearing was scheduled for Monday morning. Emily's legal team, led by a litigation partner named Sandra Mitchell, who was known in legal circles as the surgeon for her ability to cut opposing arguments into pieces, argued that Harrison's dual role as divorce attorney and corporate counsel had been fully disclosed in all relevant filings. They further argued that Brandon's motion was a transparent delay tactic designed to prevent the lawful collection of legitimately owed debts. Brandon's attorney, a man who charged $500 an hour and apparently spent none of it on proofreading, had filed the motion 2 hours past the deadline and had neglected to include a key supporting exhibit. The judge was not amused. The injunction was dissolved at 11:47 in the morning. Emily stood on the courthouse steps in the bright spring sunshine and called Harrison. Set up the meeting again, same boardroom, same time. But this time, Harrison, I am going myself. Here's a lesson worth carrying with you, whether you are fighting in a courtroom or a conference room or just trying to survive a bad week. Deadlines matter. Details matter. The difference between winning and losing is often not about who is right. It is about who was prepared. Brandon's lawyer charged him a fortune and could not be bothered to file paperwork on time. Meanwhile, Emily's team triple-checked every comma. That is not luck. That is discipline. And discipline, in the long run, beats talent every single time. For 3 beautiful days, Emily felt like the universe had finally decided to cooperate. The injunction was gone. She had Jessica's testimony and Brandon's emails. The second meeting was scheduled for Thursday. The Hayes family, desperate and with no other options, had agreed to attend. Then, on Wednesday afternoon, the bomb went off. Maggie burst into Emily's office without knocking, which she never did unless something was genuinely catastrophic. "Turn on the news," she said. Her voice was flat, which was somehow worse than if she had been screaming. Emily turned on the television mounted on her office wall. The screen filled with the logo of the New York Chronicle, one of the most widely read newspapers in the country. Below the logo, a headline crawled across the bottom of the screen in bold red letters. "The Sterling Deception. Billionaire heiress married average Joe as social experiment, then destroyed his family when he left her." The story was everywhere: television, social media, podcasts. Every major news outlet picked it up within hours. The angle was exactly what Emily had feared. She was not the victim. She was the villain. A billionaire who had played pretend poor, manipulated an ordinary man into marriage, and then unleashed her financial empire to obliterate him when he dared to leave her. The disgruntled analyst, Kevin Porter, had broken his non-disclosure agreement. He had sold the story not to the small Metropolitan Post, but to the Chronicle, which had the resources and the legal firepower to run it despite the NDA. The penalty for breaking the agreement was financial, and someone, Emily suspected the Price family, had paid Kevin enough to make the risk worthwhile. Within 24 hours, the hashtag Sterling Deception was trending nationally. Opinion was split, but the loudest voices were against her. Talk shows ran segments with titles like Billionaire Bully or Betrayed Wife, and the consensus on most of them leaned toward bully. Then Brandon went on television. He appeared on a morning show, freshly shaved, wearing a borrowed suit that almost fit, and delivered a performance worthy of an award. His voice trembled. His eyes glistened with tears that may or may not have been genuine. "I loved her," Brandon said, looking directly into the camera. "I had no idea who she was. She lied to me for 3 years. I thought we were building a life together. And now she is using her billions to destroy me because I was not rich enough for her. I am the victim here." The studio audience murmured in sympathy. The host handed Brandon a tissue. Emily watched the broadcast from her office. She watched the man who had called her a burden, who had laughed at her clothes, who had written emails calling her stupid, sit on national television and reinvent himself as the wounded hero of a love story gone wrong. She felt something shift inside her, not anger, something deeper and more dangerous, doubt. Had she been wrong? Had she become the monster? Was the woman who had hidden her identity for 3 years really any better than the man who had hidden his contempt? Maggie found Emily standing at the window of her office at 7 o'clock that evening, still in the clothes she had worn that morning, staring at the city with an expression Maggie had never seen before. It was not defeat. It was not anger. It was the look of a woman standing at a crossroads, unsure for the first time in her life which direction to walk. "We are not going down without a fight," Maggie said, setting a laptop on Emily's desk. "I have been digging all day." Brandon's morning show appearance was paid. The segment was not organic. The producer of that show is a college friend of Jessica's father. The Prices bankrolled the entire thing. Emily turned from the window. Why would the Prices care? Brandon is nothing to them anymore. Because if Hayes and Company goes down and the SEC investigation follows the money, it leads straight to a network of shell companies that the Price family used for tax evasion. Brandon's mess is tangled up with their mess. If we expose Robert, we expose them. They're fighting for survival, not loyalty. Emily sat down. The doubt that had been clouding her mind began to clear, replaced by something sharper. Purpose. She recorded a video statement the next morning. No studio. No makeup team. She sat at her desk in her office, the Manhattan skyline behind her, and spoke directly into the camera. "I hid my identity because I wanted to be loved for who I am, not for what I own. That is not a crime. That is a hope that every person in the world has carried at some point in their life. My ex-husband is entitled to his pain, but he is not entitled to rewrite history. I will let the facts speak for themselves." She then announced the Archibald Sterling Scholarship Fund, a $50 million initiative for financial literacy education for women. She donated the exact dollar amount of Vanguard stock decline to the fund on camera in real time. The video went viral. Within 48 hours, the narrative began to shift. Women across the country started sharing their own stories of being underestimated, dismissed, and defined by their bank accounts. The hashtag #IamEmily began trending alongside Sterling Deception, and slowly, steadily, the tide of public opinion turned. Emily allowed herself to exhale. She thought the worst was over. She was wrong. The emergency board meeting was called on a Friday afternoon. 6 of the 10 board members voted in favor of a motion to place Emily on a temporary leave of absence. The reasoning was clinical. The ongoing public controversy was creating material risk to shareholder value. The company's reputation required stability, and stability required distance from the scandal. Emily stood in the boardroom and listened to people she had made wealthy explain to her why she needed to step aside for the good of the company her father had built with his bare hands. "You own 51%, Harrison said afterward, pacing her office like a caged animal. "They cannot fire you. We can fight this." "They did not fire me," Emily said quietly. "They benched me." There is a clause in the corporate charter. The board can impose a 90-day cooling period for any executive who is the subject of sustained public controversy. My father wrote that clause himself. He created it to protect the company from exactly this kind of situation. He never imagined it would be used against his own daughter. Her keycard was deactivated at 5 o'clock that evening. Her corporate email was frozen. Her access to every system, every server, every file she had built over the past decade was severed in the time it took to walk from the boardroom to the elevator. Emily rode the elevator down 90 floors in silence. When the doors opened in the lobby, 300 employees watched her walk across the marble floor and out through the revolving doors. No one said a word. No one knew what to say. She stepped onto the sidewalk, and the autumn wind hit her face. She stood there for a moment, a billionaire locked out of her own kingdom, and she thought about her father's voice. "Sometimes, Evie, the hardest part of building something great is surviving the people who want to take it from you. Not the enemies, the allies. The ones who smile while they sharpen their knives." Emily spent 3 days in her penthouse. Maggie came by with soup. Harrison came by with legal briefs. Emily consumed neither. She sat in the dark, and she thought. Not about revenge, not about Brandon, not about the board. She thought about who she was when no one was watching. On the 4th morning, she woke at 4 o'clock, brewed a cup of coffee, and sat down at her personal laptop. She opened her contacts list, not the Vanguard corporate directory, but her own private list, the one she had built over 15 years of quietly cultivating relationships with the most powerful institutional investors in the world. She started making calls. The first call was to the managing director of a sovereign wealth fund in the Middle East that held 3% of Vanguard stock. She did not beg. She did not plead. She presented data, quarterly earnings, pipeline projections, the clean energy initiative that was already generating returns ahead of schedule. The second call was to the head of a pension fund in California that held 2%. Same approach. Numbers, facts, performance. By noon, she had spoken to 11 investors representing over 30% of Vanguard's outstanding shares. By the end of the day, every single one of them had placed a call to a member of the Vanguard board. The message was identical across all 11 calls, delivered with varying degrees of politeness. Reinstate Emily Sterling, or we pull our money. Every cent. The board reversed its decision in 6 days. The vote was 9-1. The single holdout, a man named Douglas Perry, who had led the original motion, resigned the following morning after it was revealed that his consulting firm had undisclosed financial ties to the Price family. On a Monday morning, Emily Sterling walked back into the lobby of Sterling Tower. She was wearing a white suit. Her heels clicked against the marble floor. 300 employees stopped what they were doing and watched. She did not gloat. She did not give a speech. She walked straight to the security desk. "Morning, John." The head of security could not quite hide his grin. "Morning, Miss Sterling. Welcome home." "Conference room A," Emily said. "Tell the acquisition team I want them assembled in 10 minutes. And John?" She turned back with the ghost of a smile. "Make sure the coffee is fresh. We have a long day ahead." Harrison was waiting by the elevator, holding a cup of coffee like a peace offering. Welcome back. I kept your chair warm. Did you also keep my parking spot? I may have accidentally allowed a delivery truck to park there for 3 days. Emily took the coffee. Petty. I approve. She took the elevator up to 91 and walked into the boardroom. The chair at the head of the table was waiting for her. She sat down, opened her laptop, and sent one email. To the Hayes family. Subject line, meeting request, Thursday, 2 p.m., Sterling Tower. The body of the email contained 4 words. The CEO will attend. The Hayes family arrived at Sterling Tower for the second time on a Thursday afternoon that smelled like rain and tasted like desperation. There was no rented limousine this time. They came in Robert's 15-year-old sedan, the only vehicle left that was not repossessed or impounded. Brandon looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 3 weeks. His suit was wrinkled. His eyes were sunken. The morning show fame had evaporated the moment the check from the Price family stopped clearing. Jessica had vanished entirely, having correctly calculated that a sinking ship was no place for a woman in designer heels. Patricia wore a Chanel suit that was not Chanel. Robert wore his ankle monitor under his pants and tried to walk without limping. They were escorted to the same boardroom, the same marble table, the same bottles of imported water, the same leather-bound notepads. Everything was exactly as it had been during the first meeting, except that this time, the chair at the head of the table was occupied. The double doors at the far end of the room opened. The click of heels on hardwood echoed through the space like a heartbeat. Emily walked in, wearing a white silk blouse, tailored trousers, and a blazer draped over her shoulders. She held a tablet in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. She did not look at them as she crossed the room. She sat down, set the coffee on the table, and opened the tablet. "Sorry I'm late," she said, her voice cool and measured. "I was on a call with our partners in Scandinavia. Renewable energy negotiations take longer than you would think." She looked up and locked eyes with Brandon. "Hello, Brandon. Close your mouth. You look like a fish." The silence that followed was so complete that Emily could hear Robert's ankle monitor humming. Brandon's brain visibly short-circuited. "Emily? What are you doing here?" His eyes darted around the room, looking for cameras, for a punchline, for any explanation that would make sense. Then his face twisted into a sneer of desperate confusion. "Did you get a job here? Are you the secretary?" Patricia, running on pure reflex, let out a nervous laugh. "Oh, thank goodness." For a second I thought, well, never mind. "Emily, dear, we are in a very important meeting. Be a darling and bring us some coffee, would you? And real cream this time, not that powdered nonsense." Emily did not blink. She looked at Patricia with an expression of profound, almost scientific boredom. Harrison Cole, who had been standing by the window like a statue, stepped forward. His voice cut through the room like a blade. "Mr. Hayes, Mrs. Hayes, I believe there is a misunderstanding. This is Emily Sterling. She is the founder, majority shareholder, and chief executive officer of Vanguard Global. She is the person you are here to see." The words hung in the air like smoke. "Sterling?" Brandon whispered. No. Her name is Emily Summers. She is an orphan from Ohio. She is a freelance graphic designer. She is nobody." "My mother was from Ohio," Emily corrected calmly. "My father was Archibald Sterling, founder of the Sterling Exchange. I used my mother's maiden name because I wanted to find out if a man could fall in love with me and not my inheritance." She leaned forward, her gray eyes narrowing. "I got my answer 3 years ago at your dinner table." Jessica, who was not present, had already provided her answer by disappearing entirely. But Patricia, even in this moment of total collapse, managed to cling to her delusions. You lied to us, Patricia said, her voice shaking. You pretended to be poor. You ate at our table under false pretenses. Emily almost laughed. Patricia, you told me I should be grateful you let me eat at the table. You told me my dress was cheap. That dress was bespoke vicuno wool from Milan. It cost more than your car. Both of your cars, actually, which I believe have been repossessed. Emily pressed a button, and the screen behind her lit up. The financials of Hayes and Company were displayed in merciless detail. Every debt, every fraudulent transfer, every stolen dollar from the employee pension fund. Here's the situation, Emily said. Vanguard Global now owns all of your outstanding debt. We own the mortgage on your home, which has already been foreclosed. We own the liens on your business assets. And we have provided the Securities and Exchange Commission with a comprehensive file detailing the misappropriation of employee pension funds, including dates, amounts, and the personal bank accounts into which the money was deposited. Robert broke down completely. He put his head on the conference table and wept. However, Emily continued, and her voice shifted slightly, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. I did not bring you here to destroy you. Destruction is easy. Any person with money and anger can destroy. I brought you here to offer you a choice. The room went still. Vanguard will acquire the assets of Hayes and Company. Every employee who lost pension money will be made whole from my personal account. Your company's operations will be absorbed into our logistics division, and 60% of your workforce will be retained with full benefits. She looked at Robert. In exchange, you will cooperate fully with the SEC investigation. My legal team will recommend leniency based on your cooperation. You will plead guilty. You will likely receive probation rather than prison time, but you will never manage a company again. She looked at Brandon. And you will sign a public statement acknowledging your knowledge of the pension fraud and your role in concealing it. You will surrender any claim to the Hayes family business assets. There will be no prison time for you, but your name will never appear on a corporate filing again. Brandon stared at her. His eyes were red. His hands were shaking. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Why? If you had all of this money and power and everything, why did you not tell me? We could have built an empire together. Emily looked at him for a long moment. She saw the man she had married, the man who had once held her hand across a restaurant table and told her she was beautiful, the man who had slowly, steadily revealed himself to be someone who could only see beauty in things that came with a price tag. Because, Brandon, she said, and her voice carried 3 years of pain compressed into perfect clarity. I did not want an empire. I wanted a husband. And you did not want a wife. You wanted a stepping stone. She stood up. Get them out of my building, Harrison, and make sure they validate their parking. I am not paying for it. 6 months passed. In the perpetual motion machine of New York City, 6 months was enough time for scandals to fade, fortunes to shift, and for a woman named Emily Sterling to transform from a tabloid headline into something else entirely. A symbol. Under her direct leadership, Vanguard Global did not just recover from the controversy, it thrived. The Clean Energy Initiative in Scandinavia exceeded projections by 40%. A struggling technology company in Silicon Valley was acquired and restructured, and the Archibald Sterling Scholarship Fund, Emily's $50 million commitment to financial literacy for women, had already enrolled its first class of 1,200 students across 30 states. The Sterling Foundation Gala was held on the first Saturday of December at the Plaza Hotel. The red carpet stretched down Fifth Avenue, lined with velvet ropes and photographers calling the names of senators, CEOs, and celebrities. Inside the grand ballroom, crystal chandeliers the size of small cars cast warm light over 600 guests. The air smelled of orchids, expensive champagne, and the particular electricity that only a room full of powerful people can generate. Emily stood in the receiving line wearing a gown of midnight blue velvet that seemed to absorb and redirect light with every movement. Around her neck hung a single diamond pendant. It had been her mother's. It was the only piece of jewelry she wore, and it was worth more than everything else in the room combined. Harrison appeared at her elbow halfway through the cocktail hour. He looked uncomfortable, which was unusual for a man whose default expression was composed disdain. "We have a situation," he murmured, leaning close so the nearby senator would not hear. The catering agency sent a last-minute replacement server. Security flagged him. He is already in the prep area. Emily's hand stilled on her champagne glass. She knew who it was before Harrison said the name. "It is Brandon," Harrison confirmed. "He is carrying a tray of drinks. He is wearing a borrowed uniform. I can have him removed in 60 seconds. Say the word." Emily looked out at the ballroom. She saw the laughter, the celebration, the culmination of months of work and years of patience. She thought about Brandon in the kitchen, wearing a uniform that did not fit, about to serve champagne to people who used to take his phone calls. If she had him thrown out, he would spend the rest of his life telling himself she was cruel. He would build an entire identity around being the victim of her vindictiveness. He would never have to face the truth. "No," Emily said. "Let him work, Evie. Are you sure?" "Let him work," she repeated, and her voice had the finality of a closing door. "Let him see exactly what he threw away. But Harrison, make sure he is assigned to Table 1. Harrison understood immediately. Table 1 was Emily's table. The keynote speech came after dinner. The lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage. Emily walked to the podium, and the applause that greeted her rolled through the ballroom like a wave. In the shadows at the edge of the room, Brandon Hayes stood frozen. He was holding a silver tray laden with crystal champagne glasses. His uniform was too tight in the collar and too short in the legs. He had taken this job for the $100 it paid, hoping to work anonymously and disappear before anyone noticed him. He had not checked the guest list. He had not known whose gala this was. Then he heard her voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, tonight is about value, not the value of a stock or a bond or a piece of property, the value of a human being. Too often, we judge people by the labels on their clothes rather than the content of their character. We mistake price for worth. We confuse what someone has with who someone is." Brandon felt a physical pain in his chest, a deep twisting ache that nearly buckled his knees. He looked at the woman on the stage, the woman he had criticized for slouching, the woman he had scolded for buying store-brand pasta, the woman he had called simple, mediocre, and not enough. She was glowing. She commanded 600 of the most powerful people in the country, not with volume or force, but with presence, with truth, with the quiet, devastating authority of someone who had been underestimated her entire life and had used that underestimation as fuel. The speech ended. The room erupted in a standing ovation. Emily descended the steps and walked to Table 1. As she sat down, the head of catering signaled to Brandon. "Hayes, Table 1 needs a refill. Move." Brandon's stomach dropped. "I cannot. Please send someone else. Everyone else is busy. Go now or you are done for the night without pay." Brandon swallowed the bile rising in his throat. He adjusted his grip on the tray. He kept his head down, staring at the carpet, and approached the table like a man walking toward his own execution. He filled Harrison's glass. He filled the senator's glass. Then he reached Emily. Her hand came into view. No wedding ring, manicured nails. Perfect. He poured the champagne. The golden liquid bubbled to the rim. His hand trembled so badly that the bottle clinked against the glass twice. Emily did not pull away. She waited until he finished. Then she spoke. "Thank you." 2 words, but the tone froze every drop of blood in Brandon's veins. It was not the voice of an ex-wife. It was not the voice of anger or triumph or cruelty. It was the voice of a stranger. Polite, distant, completely, utterly indifferent. He could not help it. He looked up. Their eyes met. For one suspended moment, the noise of the gala fell away. Brandon looked into the gray eyes he had woken up to for 3 years. He searched desperately for something: anger, sadness, love, hate, anything that would prove he had mattered, that he had left a mark on her life, that the 3 years they had shared meant something, even if that something was pain, but there was nothing. She looked at him the way you look at a person whose name you will never need to remember. She saw a function. She saw a service. She saw nobody. A single tear escaped Brandon's eye and tracked through the sweat on his cheek. "Is there anything else, Em?" he whispered, his voice cracking. Emily paused. She saw the tear. She saw the cheap suit. She saw the ruin of a man who had been consumed by his own vanity, who had mistaken cruelty for sophistication and arrogance for ambition. She could have destroyed him in that moment. One word to the guests at the table, one announcement of his name, and his humiliation would have been absolute and permanent. But Emily Sterling had moved past that. She was building something real now, and real things do not waste energy on rubble. "No," Emily said softly, turning her attention back to the conversation at her table. "That will be all." Brandon stood there for one more heartbeat. Then he turned and walked away. Through the kitchen, past the prep station, he dropped his apron in the laundry bin and pushed through the service door into the alley behind the hotel. The rain was coming down hard, cold, relentless. He stood in it and let it soak through the borrowed uniform. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. It contained a single $20 bill, his pay for the night. He walked toward a diner 3 blocks away, its neon sign flickering in the rain. Just a man in a wetsuit, hungry and alone. And back inside the plaza, under the crystal chandeliers, Emily Sterling raised her glass in a toast to the future. 1 month later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Emily found herself in a bookstore in the West Village. No security detail. No Maybach. Just a woman in jeans and a cable-knit sweater, browsing the architecture section because she had always loved buildings and had never had time to read about them. She reached for a book on Frank Lloyd Wright at the same moment as a man standing next to her. Their hands almost collided. "Sorry," he said, pulling back with a smile. "You first." "No, please," Emily said. "Go ahead." His name was Daniel Ashford. He was 37, an architect. He designed affordable housing for a nonprofit in Brooklyn. He had kind eyes, a slightly crooked nose, and the easy confidence of a man who was comfortable in his own skin without needing the rest of the world to confirm it. They talked for an hour over coffee at the shop next door. He recommended 3 books. She recommended 2. He asked what she did for a living. Emily hesitated. 3 years of hiding her identity flashed through her mind like a warning. The old instinct to deflect, to minimize, to make herself smaller so someone else could feel comfortable. Then she took a breath and said, "I run a company, a large one actually, Vanguard Global." Daniel's eyebrows rose. He set down his coffee cup. "Oh, wow, that is significant. Does that change things?" Emily asked, bracing herself. Daniel thought about it for a genuine moment. Not a performative moment, not a calculated pause, but an honest few seconds of consideration. "Well," he said, "I was going to offer to buy your coffee, but now I am wondering if you should buy mine." Emily laughed. It was a real laugh, full and warm and completely unguarded. It was the first laugh like that in years, maybe longer. 6 months after that, on a Friday evening, Emily and Daniel sat at a small table in her penthouse kitchen. Maggie was there. Harrison was there. There was pasta that Daniel had cooked, which was mediocre at best, and wine that Emily had chosen, which was extraordinary. The conversation was loud and easy, and full of the kind of laughter that only happens between people who genuinely enjoy each other's company. Daniel did not know the difference between Gucci and Gap. He drove a 10-year-old Subaru. He could not name a single hedge fund, but he asked Emily about her day every evening, and he listened to the answer. He remembered the small things, the way she took her coffee, the book she was reading, the name of the security guard she always greeted in the morning. He loved her. Not the empire, not the penthouse, not the name, her. Emily looked around the table at the people she had chosen and who had chosen her back. She thought about her father, about his dying wish, about the 3 years she had spent trying to be invisible so someone would see her. "My father told me to find someone who did not know who I was," Emily said quietly, and the table fell still. He was wrong about that. The right person is not someone who does not know who you are. The right person is someone who knows exactly who you are and loves you anyway. Daniel squeezed her hand under the table. Maggie wiped her eye and blamed the pasta. Harrison raised his glass and said nothing, which for a man who charged $2,500 an hour was the most eloquent tribute he could offer. And now, before I let you go, I want to tell you something. This story is not entirely fiction. I did not marry a billionaire. I have never set foot inside a Maybach. But I know what it feels like to sit at a table where no one thinks you belong. I know what it is like to have your dreams called hobbies and your ambitions called cute. I know what it is like to be measured by someone else's scale and found wanting. Years ago, someone told me I was too simple, too quiet, too small for the world I wanted to inhabit. And for a while, I believed them. I signed those papers, not divorce papers, but the papers of giving up on myself. I stopped trying. I stopped dreaming. I made myself small so that someone else could feel big. And then one morning, I decided not to. Emily Sterling is not real, but the feeling of being underestimated, that is as real as it gets. The moment when you stop shrinking so someone else can feel tall, that is real. And the look on their faces when they finally see who you actually are, oh, that is very real. So if you are sitting at someone's table right now, being told you do not belong, being told you are not enough, being told that your place is at the far end where the light does not reach, I want you to hear me. Stand up, walk out. Leave the keys on the gatepost. The Maybach might not be waiting in the driveway, but your future is. And trust me, it is a much better ride. If this story touched something in you, if it made you think of someone you know, or someone you used to be, share it. Hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment below. I read every single one. And remember, be careful who you step on today. They might be the ones signing your paycheck tomorrow. Here is the truth this story carries. And it is a truth that costs nothing to learn, but everything to ignore. Your value is not determined by someone else's ability to see it. The people who look down on you today may be the same people standing in your shadow tomorrow. Never let someone else's blindness convince you that your light is not real. This story is for every person who has ever been told they are not enough. For every woman who has been measured by her clothes instead of her character. For every person who sat quietly at the end of the table while others decided what they were worth. You are worth more than their appraisal, and one day they will know it. If this story stirred something inside you, if it reminded you of someone you know, someone you love, or someone you used to be, do me a small favor. Hit that like button. It takes 1 second, but it helps this story reach the next person who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below. Tell me, did Brandon deserve what he got? Or did Emily go too far? I read every single comment, and I genuinely want to hear your answer. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that their chapter is not over yet. And if you have not already, subscribe and tap that notification bell so you never miss another story of secrets, karma, and the kind of justice that only real life can deliver. Thank you for staying until the very end. That tells me something about you. You are the kind of person who does not give up on a story. Do not give up on yours either. Closing credit line. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with real-life lessons. Every word was chosen with purpose. Every twist was crafted with care, because we believe great storytelling is not just entertainment. It is a mirror that helps us see the truth about who we are and who we have the power to become. Thank you for being part of this journey.